Okay, the next part of the build focuses on the front air intake of the Lightning. So we're going to look at steps 5, 6, 7 and 8 where we attach what we built so far down into position. The good thing about this is there are red sections which just talk about the step before. So this is this part here. So number 5 is pointing at here. This is this area here, and then it goes on to here. It also tells us here 4 grams. So if you're having the wheels down, what would happen is if once you set it down, it would be what we call a tail sitter. So it would flip back and wouldn't sit with its front undercarriage on the ground. So you need to put a little bit of weight in the front just to keep it down if you're going to do that. But we're building it in flight, so we're not going to worry about that too much. I've just noticed as well here, this red part, I've missed that out of the cockpit, so I'm going to go back in a minute and just put that in. Okay, so here's all the parts that we're going to need for this part. If you can see here, there's a tiny little bit of plastic on here, and I'm not sure whether that's supposed to be there or not. So I'm going to have a quick look at the instructions and see if that should be there. Yeah, so that's an amazing bit of detail these days. So it is meant to be on there, so I've got to be really careful that I don't chop that off. So let's clean these parts up. What's really important sometimes, if you've got a large area with that's flat, taking a sander stick like this and just running it over just to ensure that it's nice and flat for a really good fit. Obviously you still have the problem of these little locating marks. Sometimes I just take those right off because they're good, but you don't really need them if you know what you're doing. Right, let's just test it fit to see how they go together. Okay, and so we can see a little bit of a gap down there. Okay, so the beauty of this glue is that once you hold your parts together, all you need to do, rather than using this and in the old days just trying to get it on the plastic, it was just an absolute nightmare and just would make such a mess. The joy of this glue is you just put your 2 parts together, and once you know that it's not, you've tested your fit, you just take your glue and you run it along the seam, and the capillary action will draw it into the tiny little gap, and so you just run it along. Draw it along the line and it will hold it beautifully in place. So that's gone together beautifully. If you're just not quite sure, just give it another run over. Okay, now the best thing to do, rather than hold it flat like this and let the gravity if you overdo it might send the glue down towards your fingers. So you know, always maybe let gravity, so if you do make a mistake, just let it draw off away from your fingers, which is useful. Okay, so that's that little bit. Now what we're going to need to do is just put that down to dry for a second. Let's just being careful, I don't want to chop that little bit off. So let's just make a nice, clean that up nicely just there. Got a little bit of flash on it. If I was building one of my normal models, I would just keep going and making sure that it was perfect. Give it a little bit of a twist, just help the thing go. I'm just going to take a little bit of glue, run it over the top, smooth it all out. So that's the first part. Okay, now the instructions are telling me I need to do a little bit of painting. So let's have a quick look. Number 56 looks like we've got to do a little bit more of this silver all the way through the pipes and around this section here as well. So I'm going to get on and paint this. Okay, remember, it's best to just do it in layers. Okay, so this first layer doesn't look particularly good, but the second layer certainly will be a lot better. Now a lot of this detail you're just not going to see, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. As you can see here, you can see the ejection pin marks. Now if this was, if I check this and see that I could see them once the model was made, I would try to get rid of those ejection pin marks, but in this case, because I'm just doing it as though I was still an 8-year-old boy, I think I'm just going to leave this sort of thing. But they are sort of things that you might want to deal with if you want to just do a better job of it. When I'm applying large amounts of paint like this, I find that bringing the brush, flicking it to and fro like I'm doing now, really sort of helps to keep it nice and smooth. Now this stuff dries quite quickly, so what you want to try to do is get it done as quick as you possibly can and get it all smoothed out. Right, so that's layer one of there. I'm just going to use the hairdryer to try and speed this up. Okay, now we're going to glue these parts together, and as you can see, although we've painted all that behind, you're really not going to see in there. There's really sometimes little points, sometimes painting it. So all this detail of this engine fan, the fan of the engine, you're just not even going to see it. But it's, you know, that's part of the fun, is just, you know, knowing it's there, even though somebody else doesn't. So we'll just pop some glue along there. Okay, and then we're going to bring the two halves together. I'm not worried too much about the seam here, as long as it goes together okay, because again you're not going to see any of this, so we just run our glue along the seam, let it do its job, hold it for a bit. Now this is where something that obviously is available to everybody, the good old clothes peg, okay, can come in very handy. To hold these things together. We'll come in and tidy it. Let's just straighten all this up, just make sure it's nice and straight and lined up. Okay, now here's what I mean about the glue. So here the glue has come onto the plastic. I've got my finger on it with some paint, and then it's smeared it all over the edge of the paint. So if I just do a test here, look, if I just show you, look what happens when, if you just smear it, it just becomes an absolute mess. So the key thing is just don't get it near your fingers, and if you do spill it, just don't touch it until it's dry. It's now bone dry and it won't do anything. Now the good thing about that is it's going to be completely hidden out of sight anyway. So right, there's some bits in there I'm not quite happy with. I wish I'd tidied up a little bit more, but never mind. I'm just treating this as though it's my first build, and you always learn from your mistakes. Sometimes what I would do, I would get my wash and just put some wash into and around the fan just to bring out the detail. Now you can do that, it looks all very nice and it brings out the detail, but the sad thing is it's going to be completely covered up and you're not going to see it anyway. So, you know, there you go. Can you see it down in there? I don't think so. But let's just come in here, glue that up, just make it all nice and secure, put a peg on there, leave it for a couple of minutes and we're done. Okay, it's a bit tidy up. Right, so let's put these to the side and just have a look at the plans now. Okay, so we've got to the point now, so here we are, we have put this together, we've made this, we've got this part together. The next part will be to bring down the pilot and the cockpit onto the front of the intake. Okay, and so let's look at the next stage. We're going to make the tail pipes here, look at the afterburners and the rear of the engine, and then we're going to bring the two halves together, and this is where it starts to get a little bit more interesting. Okay, so I'm going to go and have a cup of tea, and then I'll be back a bit later. Okay, let's get these parts together now then. So let's just double check that's there. Just going to give that a bit of a tidy up. Now this will serve as the inside of the wheel bay at the front of the aircraft, but we're going to be covering that up, so I'm not too worried about what that looks like inside there. But that would often sometimes need painting, but we won't paint that. Now I don't need to clean up any of these seams, I just need to make sure that it's, you know, a little bit clean, but I don't need to worry about tidying it up too much. But this front section here just needs to be nice and smooth. Just going to tidy up where I put my finger on the glue. Okay, and then polish it all up. Now let's talk about these lines here. So if you look just here, there's a line there and a line on this side here, maybe a little bit of a gap. Now this is where you would come in and you would use some sort of filler or putty just to improve it. Now because this is just an out of the box Airfix starter kit, I'm going to leave the putty for a later video. So check out one of my other models where I will show you how to use this stuff in a bit more detail. But for the moment we're just going to leave it, and we're just going to roll with the punches and see what happens. And even if it's not perfect, it doesn't matter. Just going to treat this as you know, what you could do if it was your very first build. So we're just going to test the pilot on here. That's looking good. So let's get him in place. And so there we have the first part finished. So we have the front of the air intake, we have our pilot in position. I've added in that little bit that I forgot earlier on, and so we're ready for the next stage. Just using a knife here to come into the afterburners where this part was taken out, just to take the most of the plastic clean before I come in with a sanding stick to smooth it all out. These sanding sticks are great because they get right, you can get them into nice little areas like this. Failing that, you could use a metal file, a rounded file is sometimes what I use to clean up places like this, especially round areas. Might use a metal file. Now I suggest that you paint these before you insert the afterburners into this end section, but because of, you know, what you can actually see, I've decided not to do it that way, and I'm just going to glue them in and paint what you can see. Don't want to waste my time painting things that can't be seen. With the Tamiya extra thin, you soon get a feeling for how much glue you need for different circumstances. Sometimes you just need a bit, and sometimes you want to load the brush so you get a good amount of glue going around where you need it. It also suggests that you paint the inside of these tubes here, but I think I will, just because you can see a little bit down in there. It won't make much difference, but we'll paint the inside. We'll paint this section now after we've cleaned them up. Again, you can really see the ejection pin marks in these pipes here. Normally I would, if this was a proper build, I would clean those up, make them so that the pipes looked very smooth, but in this case we're not going to worry too much about things like that. Well, that's okay for the moment. I think what we'll do, we'll let that dry and then come back in at the end and just tidy those up when everything's in place. Okay. Right, so now we're on to the section where we're going to bring these two parts together. We're going to bring the two bits that we've made and then we're going to join it all together. And here it's question marks to see, you know, there's a stand that you can buy for these things. I'm going to make my own, so it's suggesting there that you need to maybe cut out the tabs where that stand goes in, but I'm going to leave them in and we're going to drill a hole for our stand. So let's get the fuselage parts and then let's join this thing together. Now this for me is the bit that starts to get, I quite enjoy, is when we start getting the fuselage together and the main parts together. It starts to take shape. I do quite enjoy painting the cockpit and detailing the cockpit on larger models, but this is where the fun really begins for me, is where we are building the thing, putting the thing together. So there are two fuselage halves. Let's just see how that goes together with nothing. Okay, and see where the issues might arise. So we've got not a bad little seam there, just a bit of a clean up, just a little bit of a gap here that we need to deal with. That's not too bad, not too bad. So once we've cleaned that up, it's not going to be too difficult to get a decent join. So let's go in with a sanding stick and just see if we can tidy this up a little bit. Sometimes it's better to use one of these flat ones, especially on these larger ones. You don't want to wear away too much of the fuselage. You want to keep it nice and perpendicular, nice and flat to the seam, so you don't just create more gaps. So let's have a look. We've got a nice seam there, that'll be fine. That's a nice seam, goes together beautifully there, and a little across the bottom. So we should have no problems now. There's a little bit of gap there we need to deal with, so we'll just give that a little bit more of a sand in that area. Right, so what we'll do, we'll see how that fits in quite nicely. Now normally what I do is I'll maybe paint on the inside of this cockpit here. It does suggest you do that in the instructions here, so number 163, so the green. But as I'm looking at it, I can't see actually whether you'll see much of that. So with the cockpit on, let's just do it anyway. It says it in the instructions. So what I might do is I might bring my glue in here when I've got the two halves together, but that should hold it nicely in place there. Then we'll come up the back of the cockpit here. Okay, let's get around one of our little pegs. We'll just come in there and hold that in place. Okay, the next section. So next section looks like that. It's a nice little fit. Just check the fit. Yep, nice. So what we'll do now, just come in here with the glue here. And again, we'll come in here later on with the glue on this side. Right, let's see if we can get these two parts together. So let's have a look. So we've got not a bad little join. So we'll come along the tail plane here first of all. So we're just going to drop the glue into that seam, and it will just run along, nice and straightforward. Then we'll get one of our pegs. I'll get one of my rubber ones. The ones with the rubber on the end is quite good. They don't slip so much. So we'll get that in there. Then we're just going to work along this top seam until we get it all nice and joined up, and I'm just going to let gravity do its job. Okay, just open it up a little bit so it's just coming all the way down. And as you open it, it's just nice and straightforward. Okay, now here's where we have an issue. This little part of the back of the cockpit here needs to be up above that little joint, so we're going to just pull that out, push it together, a couple more pegs. In there. We're just going to let that dry for a minute. So just let that dry, and then we'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, while we let that bit dry, we're just going to go on to build maybe part of the wings. It's I don't want to go onto the bottom seam here until this bit is dry, and so I can take the pegs off and see how it's going. Alright, so I'm just going to put that to one side and look at the next part of the instructions to see what we're going to build next. So as we can see here, once this is completed, what we're going to go on to do, so we'll leave this bit out for the moment, and then we're going to build the wings, and we're going to decide on the, I guess these are, see, I'm not sure with this aircraft, are the ailerons at the end here, and these are the flaps, or are these the ailerons as well? I'm not an expert with the Lightning. Let's just have a quick look. Could be either, I'm not sure. Maybe one of you guys might know a bit better, but anyway, so it looks like the flaps or the ailerons, they're coming in here. So what we'll do is we'll get on, get all the parts for the wings cut off, and then we'll get going with that. Well, inspecting the instructions here, I can see, obviously, I think these are flaps, because they're both, you can either position them up or position them down at a 45-degree angle, and both being down would suggest they're both flaps. So these must be ailerons at the end, which you know, help you to roll, whereas these are the flaps. And I guess with sitting on the ground, they might be down, and as flying they would be up. So we're going to position ours up, because we're going to put ours in a flight position. Be careful here as well. It looks like we've got to drill some holes here. It's asking for a 1mm drill bit. I'm assuming that's That's for the refueling, for this refueling pod. Okay, so that's what it's looking for. So for the refueling arm, refueling thing, we're drilling the holes for this refueling pod. Now it's a question mark, so not sure if it has to have it. In this case, I think I'm going to leave that bit off. Right, so let's clean these parts up. First of all, see how they go together. So this one, this wing, not too bad, just a little bit cleaned up, and that should go together fine. Now, I sometimes like to, if I'm building wheels up, so the doors for the wheels, the wheel well doors, I often like to glue those on while I can still get to the back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore the instructions in this part, and I'm going to glue these doors on before I put the wings together. Alright, so that's an instance where you don't have to stick exactly to the instructions. So think carefully about, you know, how you want to work and how you want to do things. And how to make things easier for yourself, really. Okay, so by putting these in first before you put the wings, it just means you get just a better chance of, actually that goes in lovely, that's a beautiful fit, nicely engineered that, and so I no problems whatsoever. All I will need to do here is just run some glue around it. You know, you don't have to worry about getting it dead into the, you know, just running it over the top of the line is enough. If it pulls, just let it evaporate. Just the important thing is just don't touch it, don't put your finger on it, okay, just let the glue do its job and evaporate, and that is a beautiful little fit in there. Let the glue do its job, that's lovely. Okay, so you know, you can see now that's almost dry, that's evaporated. And so you can run your finger over it without any worry about getting it. Just takes a little while to dry. Test fitting is really important. Just, you know, not just trying to throw it together, but testing to see if it's going together nicely. You know, it saves you a lot of trouble with filling and just coming in and trying to fix problems if you sort the problem out before you get to it. So let's just put some glue down there, put a peg on there, and let that glue together. Okay, just going to let them dry a minute, and let's come back to the fuselage. So let's take these pegs off. Should be enough to be able to work with. Just make sure it's all lined up nicely. Now it's still movable slightly, and the glue's not totally cured or dried, and you know, it takes about 24 hours I think for it to go solid, so you can still move things about, and if you make a mistake you can take it apart, but at this stage it's strong enough to be able to hold its own. So you know, where you've been holding something together, it will hold together quite nicely. So now we can come in at the bottom and see if we can get this together. Right, we have a bit of an issue here. As you can see, just here we've got a bit of a gap, so that's not gone together very well. See if we can sort that out. Not quite sure why that is, but shouldn't be too much of an issue. So what we'll do, we'll come back to that in a bit. Let's just run some glue down here. Okay, back to the wings. That should be enough time for that to dry. while we're waiting for the wings and the fuselage to the glue to dry, let's have a quick look at what we can do now. So what we've got here then, so here we're going to, after we've done this, we're going to attach the wings, we're going to attach the tailplane, the tailplanes, then we're going to add some detail parts to the cockpit, and we're going to put these little parts on here, adding some fins, a arrestor hook. We're going to add some hatch covers here. We've done this part already, so we don't need to worry about it. Then we're going to add this in. I'm not quite sure why this is red really, but hey. This part we can ignore because we're not doing any of this, but obviously what we do need to do is on B25 is making sure that this goes in nicely as well, but we can ignore all of this page because this is all about the gear being down. Then we can go on to look at other flaps that we can have open or closed, adding some of the detail parts, which I always leave till the end because I'm likely to break them off, and then we have the missiles going on, and then finally, last of all, the cockpit. Okay, and the cockpit parts, and then we'll be done. So I'm gonna, while I'm waiting for that to dry, I'm gonna make up these missiles. What's great about these sprue cutters, they have a nice sharp end, okay, a nice pointed end, so you can get that right into some of the smaller parts. Ideal. Whereas something like this, not quite as easy to get into some spaces that you want to. Right, it looks like on the end of the missiles we've got some clear parts, so we're looking for F5. Very small parts, quite difficult to clean up, so this is where you need really small fingers. Try to get in there to clean these up. So what we can also do is clean them up when they're actually attached to the missile fronts. So these should be dry now. We'll come back to the missiles in a little while because I need to let those really dry well before I add any more bits. Remember, this is number 5, put over there, number 6 over there. Okay, let's come back to the fuselage and see how we're getting on. Okay, this is where we really want to try to sort out this bit here. Okay, it will push together, but it's just trying to make sure that we get it together. So that's it, let's get some glue in here. Now, sometimes in a situation like this I might use a little bit of super glue just to hold that together and get it done really quickly. So if you have any super glue, if you're having trouble holding things together, sometimes a little drop of super glue applied with a cocktail stick will just hold it together nicely. But we're just going to go with the glue we've got here, and then we're just going to put a good amount in that little gap, and then I'm just going to come in and I'm going to hold it there. Now if I get this at a certain angle, it seems to hold it quite nicely, so let's see if we can get it just to hold. Right, we're going to leave that for a good amount of time now to dry, and then we'll come back to that in a little while. So let's go back to the wings, which are coming on nicely, and then let's glue this front edge together. Okay, there's no need to rush any of this. You know, if I try to glue all the wings together, I'll be, you know, having trouble just trying to keep all the seams from not splitting. So where the plastic might be slightly warped, you're better off just doing it section by section, and then coming back to it once it's glued and dried. A bit more glue down there. Right there, we had a bit of glue that's just come off the edge. Okay, and so what we want to do is really let that dry and without getting our finger stuck on it. So that's why it's always better actually to let gravity work by holding it this way, but I keep forgetting to do that sort of thing. I'm often in a bit of a rush, so let's just making sure we don't go where there's glue that's spilled over. Just use these to get that front edge sorted. Okay, let's leave those to dry now. Let's come back to our missiles. Right, it's going to need some cleaning up, but before we clean it up, let's okay, the glue's still quite soft, and the plastic's quite soft where it's not 100% dry yet, but it's quite easy to sand and to smooth this out. Trying to get rid of that seam liner so it doesn't notice. Some of these parts are quite small and tricky, and sometimes you just might knock things, but if you get a bit of your extra thin on there before it breaks off, it often sorts out the problem. So there's the first missile finished. Good stuff about this glue. If you imagine trying to use this stuff and trying to get that glue and fix that fin on, absolute nightmare unless you try to apply it with a cocktail stick or something like that. And that's the reason why that glue, when I was growing up, was just an absolute mess, especially when you were rushing to get a model made. Just make sure all our fins are all laid out, and let's just leave that. Let's leave the missiles to dry. Okay, we're going to leave that fuselage a little bit longer, but let's come back to the wings. Few little gaps which we can sort out. I think we'll sort those out once we attach the wings, and we leave it overnight to dry. So what I'm going to do first, I'm just going to run a bit of glue all the way down that channel, and then just pop our flap into position. Give it a wiggle so it just glues nicely. Just make sure it's nice and flat. Check down our edges. Voila, that's all nice. So that's our wings pretty much finished. We just need a bit of a clean up. What we can do then is we can come in and do this section here. So let's cut those bits off and get the belly done. Not the best fit, so what we might do is we might come in and glue the first half and then come in and glue the second half afterwards, but it doesn't fit particularly well. Let's try the other side. This is where when you come across a problem like this, you want to be patient and just keep test fitting and and looking for where you can just improve that fit. So this side comes in much better, so I think we'll start off, still have to push that in there, but I think we'll come in and we'll glue this bit into position. So often with these kits they try to engineer it in a way that actually the seam lines and the parts that you're gluing in follow the natural seam lines of the aircraft. Obviously in some cases, like this central seam line down the middle of the fuselage here, that is not necessarily on most aircraft a natural seam line, so that will require some cleaning off and some attention to make that look nice. So later on we'll talk about how we get rid of these center seam lines and talk about how we restore some of the detail that we might sand away. Okay, so that's nearly in position. This is not going to like going together, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to make sure that bit's in position. What you could also do here is run some super glue down in that section there. Just going to run a bit more glue down in here. Okay, I'm not sure why they just left this out. They could have made this fuselage half with that part in. It seems a bit unnecessary that they've left this bit out, so that they, you know, for you just to make this bit. It would have been much more sensible just to put this as part of the fuselage, unless they had problems with the moulding, not sure. Okay, but looking okay. We're going to leave that to dry for a bit. So let's come back to the missiles. They should be all nice and, yep, not too bad. And let's come in and finish these off. Sometimes you can just use the glue to smooth things out as well, because it melts the surface of the plastic. As you brush it on, you're almost effectively painting it with plastic. The thing is, with working in this sort of scale, it's very difficult when you've got tiny bits like this that you want to get in and clean up. It's very, very difficult to do that. That's why I love working in bigger scales, where you can get into all the nooks and crannies much easier. Got some nasty ejector pin marks on the inside of these pylons, these parts that have the missiles attached to. But we're not going to really deal with these in this build. If this was a more one of my other builds, I would deal with that. So they're all ready to go. Just will need painting and attaching last of all. So I'll put those to the side. Come back to our wings, we'll have a look at these. They're looking good, it's looking good. Nice and solid. Let's just give this a clean up. At this point, this is where you might want to use a sponge sander, because it conforms better to the leading edges. And so if you're getting further into the hobby and you're looking to expand your tools, it's always good to have a more flexible sander, just so that you can, things like leading edges of wings, really useful. I'm quite impressed with these wings. These, some of these kit parts go together really nicely. Just as nicely as some of the more expensive kits. Let's just take that off. I don't think we need to worry too much about it, but just make sure and put it all together, it fits nicely. Let's come back to this and see how we're getting on with the front of our nose. Right, what I'm tempted to do here is I'm going to leave this section. I'm going to put the rest of it together. I'm going to clean up the seams, and then overnight I'm gonna glue this and just leave it overnight so it gets a really good strong part. So I'm going to see if I can get these bits together, get the wings on, get it looking like an aeroplane, and then leave it almost finished off, so that in the morning I can come back and we can get on with painting. So looking really nice though, really happy with this. There's a little gap in here. Normally I'd put some filler in there, but we're just going to leave that for the moment. We'll glue this line, centre line, a little bit later on once this section is dry. So let's get on and maybe add all our little hatches and flaps, and then we'll clean it all up. Now this is the point where I always tend to try to rush. I love to get the things, you know, the wings on and things like that, because I'm just desperate to see what it looks like. And sometimes this is where I make the most mistakes, because I'm just rushing to get it finished. So I can't see any harm in putting the wings on now. So I think what we'll do is we'll get those wings on. Now for this I'm just going to put quite a lot of glue down in here. And as you can see already, that's taken bite already, and you know, a really nice fit already. Right, we have a bit of a wing coming apart here. Just going to squeeze that together. You'll notice at the moment what I've done is I've abandoned the instructions because I think I know what I'm doing. Not necessarily the best thing to do. You should just keep with the instructions, but I've been making models for so long now that I start to realise that actually sometimes it's just common sense. Okay, the model's been left to dry overnight. So we've kept it clamped up so that the seams have come together and allowed it to dry overnight, so that we can just take these off, and all the seams really nice and flush put together. There's a couple of things here that I'm not quite happy with, some little gaps in here and here. Normally I'd use a filler here and try to sort these out, but because we're treating this as almost like a build for your first time, we're just gonna leave it as it is and just see what we can create just with very basic things. So we're going to crack on with just getting some of these parts on, some of the hatches, and we'll get this finally built up, nearly ready for the final paint job. It's really starting to come together now, and quite a nice little model really.